Today is a big day for me. Today I'm going to be building a new mini quad. I'm very excited about this. I've been just taking little pieces here and there that I've come across. I've actually been collecting parts for this for like a lot of months now. So I'm very excited. I finally got all the pieces. Let's quick run through all the components I plan on using on this build. The frame I plan to use for this build is a Xhover Win 5 frame. So this is actually a racing frame. It's a really lightweight frame and it's a stretch X design. So the motors are further apart from front to back than they are side to side, which is kind of opposite of my freestyle frames back there, which are wider than they are front to back. I don't plan on racing it. We don't have any races around here. I will just be freestyling it, but I wanted to try something different, and it's gonna be a very, very lightweight design. So that's what we're going for here. For electronics on this build, I'm gonna have a Raceflight Revolt flight controller, as well as a Raceflight Bolt 4-in-1 ESC. For motors, I'm gonna be running the trusty T motor, F40 2400 kV freestyle motors. The FPV cam on this rig is going to be a Runcam Swift Mini 2. It's actually a mini-sized camera, but it comes with this nice bracket to make it kind of like a full-size camera that will fit into this frame. TBS Unify, this is the Unify Pro HV version. I am gonna try and mount the Unify to this Whitenoise FPV board. This board is actually just meant to mostly just be a good mounting solution for the Unify. And I also plan to mount my receiver on the backside of that, so I'll show you more about that later. Again, I'm trying to make this very, very lightweight, so the antenna that I chose is the Lumineer AXII, like the Stubby version. It's a very, very small, very durable, and I've heard really good things about this antenna. I do run Spektrum, so the receiver that I prefer is the 4649T telemetry receiver. My battery of choice is the 1300 milliamp hour 90C Venom packs. Plan on starting out with some Gemfan 5152s, and then I just got some miscellaneous 3D printed parts for mounting GoPros and stuff like that. So let's get started. All right, so the first step here is gonna be to build this bottom portion of the frame, and then we'll start building our electronics on top of that. So you'll wanna start with these two bottom plates and the 4 arms. You can see that this plate here has the little nut insert things on it. So that will be like the top portion of the bottom sandwich plate, and then this X-shaped one will be the bottom portion. So let's get started with that. So there we go, just put the center 4 screws in just to kind of hold it together. Now we're gonna start building the stack. I got myself some of these longer screws. I'm gonna bring those through from the bottom and actually put a small nut, a lock nut, but just a regular nut, 3 millimeter nut, right at the bottom. It's just gonna help keep these standoffs in place when I'm trying to work with them. And it's also gonna just give that Bolt 4-in-1 ESC a little bit of extra space off of that carbon and just help out the spacing in the stack just a little bit. So now that I have the 4 bolts on there for the stack, I'm gonna start stacking on the electronics. All right, so the first thing I'm gonna do with the Bolt 4-in-1 ESC is I'm gonna plug the included cable into the bottom here, just because that is gonna be hard to access later. So connect this connector on the bottom, make sure you have it good and pushed in. This is the connection that's gonna go to your flight controller. And I am going to orientate my XT60 connection towards the back of the quad. So it will just slide onto the standoffs like this. And you can see there that I have a really nice tight gap at the bottom of the stack there, and those extra nuts on the bottom, they're helping keep everything in place, and they're also just gonna give you the perfect amount of space on the bottom. So next is the actual Revolt flight controller, and you're gonna wanna get that oriented correctly as well. What I plan to do with mine is actually place it upside down with the larger Raceflight logo on the top here, and just squish that all the way down on top of the ESC. And I don't run any extra spacers in between the flight controller and the ESCs, just because those little gummies that come with the Raceflight stuff are actually spaced appropriately, so you have a good amount of space right in between. All right, so you can run this connector over and connect it on the top. So now that I have the start of the stack here, I'm gonna start tinning all of the motor pads around the outside, and I'll probably tin some more of these XT60 connectors and maybe some of these connectors for capacitors, and I also plan on running my video transmitter off of these pads up top too. So I'm gonna just tin some pads here to get that out of the way. All right, so I have all the pads tinned. I actually plan on connecting the motors to the bottom. I think it'll be a little bit of a cleaner build in the end. All right, let's install the motors next. Okay, so now I have the motors installed. I can just go ahead and connect the motors to the 3 closest pads to each motor, and I'm gonna connect those on the bottom. So I'm gonna cut and tin them, and cut them to the right length, tin them, and connect them. I have all of the motors installed, and I have all of them wired up to the 4-in-1 ESC. Next thing we're gonna work on is actually putting in the Spektrum receiver. So I am gonna modify the Spektrum receiver just a little bit. I plan on decasing this. I like to put some hot glue in on those pigtails because those pigtails oftentimes I've had trouble with them coming off. I plan on putting some hot glue in there and then using some heat shrink around it. As well as I plan on trying to mount it to the back of this Whitenoise FPV board. I don't actually plan on using the pins to actually power the receiver or anything like that. I'm just gonna run a cable. That just seems like more complicated than actually running the cable to the flight controller. I always think that the fewer connections, the better, because there's less things to go wrong. I kind of like to take this heat shrink and just stretch it out really good first. It just seems to shrink down a lot easier and a lot better. You get a nice tight fit onto the component if you kind of stretch this stuff out first, it seems like. So that Spektrum receiver that I'm using that I mentioned before, it requires anywhere between 4 and 8 volts or something like that. So we are gonna have to bridge a couple things on this flight controller so that it provides 5 volts instead of 3 volts. I'm gonna use TX1. So we're gonna go to the TX1 right there. So not this set, we're looking at the bottom set here. We're gonna go TX1, we want normal for Spektrum, not inverted. So we're gonna bridge these 2 pads for normal, and then I want 5 volts and not 3 volts. So I'm gonna bridge those bottom 2 pads. So I need to bridge those pads and those pads for the Spektrum receiver that I'm using. So this receiver comes with this cable. It has 2 connectors on the end. This female one here, this is for binding or putting the receiver into bind mode. So we need to leave that one on there. I just use a bind plug typically, so I do need this connection to stay on the quad. This other one, I am gonna cut this off and then just direct solder this onto the flight controller. The next step now is to kind of get these components mounted to that Whitenoise board and to start working on the video system. So, before I can get that mounted to this Whitenoise board, I do want to go ahead and solder the video transmitter to this board first. So again, I am using the TBS Unify Pro HV, and we're going to go ahead and take this heat shrink plastic stuff off of here so that we can direct solder it onto this board so it can get mounted in the stack very easily. One trouble that I always had with these unified video transmitters is I hate this little pigtail connection here. This is always a problem, it's always coming off. So what I do is I remove all of this black glue stuff that they have in here, at least as best as I can, and I actually turn this connector around and head it that direction, and then I'll actually bridge a little bit of solder on that backside. Bridge a little bit of solder across that pigtail. Gives you that little bit of extra strength that you want. You can see here they have little solder pads here on the side, right here and right here, as well as here and here. And what that is intended for is to actually bridge a little bit of solder across onto the edge of the board. And that's just basically what keeps it in place. And there's some extra pads on the bottom. You don't want to solder those. Those are just intended for a little bit of heat transfer to this board to help keep this VTX a little bit cooler. All right, so now that I have this Unify all soldered to this Whitenoise board, I'm gonna start getting this wiring harness ready. This wiring harness comes with the Unify, but it needs to be modified slightly. Basically, there's 2 different leads on here. This set of wires is what powers the Unify. I am gonna cut that off and directly solder that to the all-in-one ESC. So on the front of the Bolt 4-in-1 ESC, there are 2 sets of pads, one set right here and another set right here. that are just battery voltage. So I plan on using those to power the VTX. So we really only need 3 different wires going to this camera. That would be the input voltage, 5 to 36 volts it accepts, a ground, and then the video signal coming out. So that's going to be the red, black, and yellow. The white one here is actually audio going into the VTX. But I don't have a microphone on this setup, and this camera does not have a microphone either. So this white one is not going to be used. So I'm just going to remove it altogether. There we go. This connector should match up with this camera now. Input voltage, ground, and video, and it should plug in like so. All right, with that, it's starting to look like a quad, guys. I am gonna take this board back off now and see if I can kind of use some 2-sided sticky tape to mount that receiver to the bottom side of that board, and then kind of put some spacers in here to try and get that board mounted up just right. What I typically do if I need some standoffs is a lot of times I will use this little fuel tubing. This is like some fuel tubing for like a gas-powered RC car, and I just happen to have some of that laying around. So what I like to do is just kind of cut the length that I need to get the standoff size that I need, and that's what I plan to do on this. All right, so the stack is looking to be about complete, and I'm gonna put some lock nuts on the top to kind of hold everything down. All right, next step on this build is to actually mount the camera. So top plate has these 2 little side camera pieces. We're gonna put this extra bracket that comes with that mini run cam onto the run cam. Makes it kind of a full-size camera, and then I will mount those side plates on there. Rotate it and tighten these 2 side screws to adjust your camera angle. I kind of shoot for 30 to 35-ish, somewhere in that range. So next I'm going to solder this XT60 connector onto the back of that 4-in-1 ESC along with this 2200 microfarad capacitor just to help with some of the video noise issues. So I do have the pigtail solder to the bottom and the capacitor to the top, and then I just taped them together to try and make it a little bit more durable. So now we're gonna move on to actually mounting the top plate and the standoffs, and putting in some 3D printed parts on the back 2 standoffs here to kind of hold the antennas. Just kind of tightening things up and finishing it up now is the next step. These are the 2 awesome 3D printed parts that I plan to use. I got these from brain3d.com. Check out their website. They have a lot of different really good high quality prints and a lot of different parts for different mini quads and stuff like that, and fast shipping too. So check out Brain3D, a lot of cool colors, really good prints. We will mount these standoffs through the frame with the longer screws that it includes, and then we'll get going with the antennas. The video transmitter and the receiver antennas will be mounted through this 3D printed part just to keep them all straight and out of the props. So this 3D printed part is just going to get installed right on top of these 2 standoffs. I'll probably try to keep it as high as I can just to keep the antennas as far as I can away from the prop line. Also just gives me room for that capacitor that I installed. It actually works out pretty well. These 2 little holes will have some antenna tubes going for these 2 antennas, and then this pigtail will be connected to my video transmitter antenna and through the larger hole. Everything is mounted and secure. We're ready to go on with the top plate now, bolt everything down, and we should have a working quad. So there you have it, guys. That's the completed build. This is the first build I've ever done, and tried to record it. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, consider subscribing, considering hitting the like button, because we will be doing more videos like this. I am going to be doing a video on how to get this set up on the Raceflight configurator. Also, I will be doing some videos on my maiden flight with this hot rod. So the last thing I need to do here is come up with a name for this ride. So, what should I name this thing? You gotta name your quads. That's like half the fun. We got the purple painting machine. We also got the green monster back here. I do like how it turned out looking, but I think I'll name it